First user group, in Bristol. It's pretty exciting. This is really an opportunity, just to reiterate what Lucy said, for you to really start, if you like, boosting your career. And the key thing to boosting your career is public speaking, to get comfortable with public speaking. And now you have a forum that's going to meet very regularly, right? Here for you to try and practice what you're learning in your jobs, in your careers, that type of thing. What I'm speaking on today, I knew nothing about on Sunday. So I had to go out and research it and work out what to talk about, maybe one or two things. And I came up with this, what is a data model? And the thing is, I decided to go out and ask a few people, what is an actual data model? Yep, moving on. So, oh, look at that, went too quickly. Can we back up one? Here we go. Let's see what people say a data model is. Mate, the technology is letting me down already. Let me go back one more. Here we go, and here it is.
Oh gosh, okay, so I can have like hours to describe this. I'll probably say a data model is normally something I'll do in Excel, or like kind of normally, every sheet is something relevant to an organisation, obviously depending on what you do as an organisation, and essentially it translates to those kind of types of records, and essentially, you can have like data cubes and all of that kind of stuff. I know I'm probably not making any sense, but let's keep it nice and simple. I normally do a data model in Excel when I first start a project.
So a data model to me is you've basically got all of your entities, they've got relationships to each other, and just kind of the relationship with all those entities is your data model.
A data model will be a representation of things that you need to, model, to store. You're going to analyse, that's a hard question, Mark, let me have a little think.
Everyone's talking about it, but nobody really knows how to do it, right? So what is a data model? So what I'm going to do is use the metaphor of a zoo tonight and look at, if you like, how would we create a data model for a zoo? And really, you can create a data model for anything. If you want to create a data model for your body, you have an entity that deals with torsos and another entity that deals with an arm, and there'll be a relationship between the arm and the torso, for example. So if we were to look at, for example, to start with, what is the definition of a data model? And the old term that we used to use was schema, right? It's where you take something from the physical world and you're going to translate it into a database. So as you can see, a schema refers to the organization of data as a blueprint. Blueprint is another common term we see. We don't have it anymore, but in the old days, blueprints were kind of the way architectural drawings were done, right? They were done on some type of blue paper that transferred through machines. So that's kind of where we come from when we start to think about explaining a data model. And when you look at building software for a customer or inside your businesses and organizations, you've got to consider or start at the point of what is the data model and how are you going to model out the challenge, the business problem that you want to solve. And so as we look at a data model and transferring it into a database, we have, of course, tables, fields, relationships, views, index, metadata is as we start to build out that model. But in its simplest form, it is purely a table similar to an Excel spreadsheet related to another table similar to the kind of layout of an Excel spreadsheet. So here's our example of the zoo, and I really want to highlight this point at the top here, that entities describe how real-world entities are modeled in the database. And really, if we're really to say what is a data model, it's around modeling real-world entities. That's the simple answer when we think about it. So in this case, we have a zoo, we have animals. If we wanted to have an entity for enclosures and one for animals, we would lay it out like this and then put a relationship between what breed, etc., would appear in the other. Sorry for the camel casing and my referencing there. I forgot to change that, but now I see it. And then, of course, within those entities, imagine tables, we have attributes and traits. And so, basically, we have the relationship between the entities. We have the attributes, as you can see, which are really translate to the fields that you put on into your common data service, ultimately. And then you can have traits. And so if I was designing a trait or thinking about a trait between a contact and account, is let's say I had a lawyer in that business or associated to this account and I wanted to create that connection, that would be a trait of the type of relationship between those. Going a bit more, traits and semantic metadata that we can go into is what is the meaning and the intent of that data. So for example, in the illustration we have here is that, we see Sydney, Australia there, and if we wanted to represent the size of cities, that would be semantic data that we would keep about the size of a city and how we want it to appear. Or, as the example gives here, a survey response, we could look at the sentiment that was coming through that data and then represent that in our system. So simply, a common data model is what? Modeling real-world entities into a database, right? And the relationships between them.
A data model is essentially a shared schema. That's kind of how I'd normally describe it, and obviously this is obviously related to CDS and all of that, and Microsoft CDS and in the Power Platform, and essentially it's shared across lots of different applications, normally central to an entire business.
Common data model is, to me, I think, going to be entities that are sort of a standard entity that you might find in different types of databases. So you might have an account or a contact, things that are going to be sort of typical, common across different types of models. So maybe like for Dynamics CE or F&O or talent, you're likely to have an account, you're likely to have a contact, that type of thing.
The common data model is a Microsoft idea, isn't it? Mm-hmm. Where they are presenting you with a list of entities and fields that they feel are going to be used across different industries and against different products, and so that all the different products can leverage the same model, and then therefore we find that we can synchronize and integrate between different products more easily because we're all talking the same language.
You can all explain what a common data model is now, right? Everyone was on point, they all said the same thing. Everyone's in agreement, right? Considering all those are MVPs that have been on here for the 2 videos so far, what I'm trying to illustrate is that sometimes we struggle with communicating to other people in our organizations that are associated to our projects, maybe subject matter experts. What is a data model? And then, what's this common data model? I was just in China a month or so ago training some staff at Microsoft in Beijing, and the most senior person in the team came up to me and said, listen, this is a Microsoft employee. I don't really understand what CDS and the common data model are. They're the same thing. He'd been working in Microsoft a long time, and there's a lot of confusion. And so with the 3 parts, I'm trying to break that confusion down a little bit. So if we take a look at what the common data model is, it allows us to have a shared set of data that we can build multiple apps and connect to multiple other data sources on. Okay, so it's a common language. So if we're in the automotive industry and you're an automotive retailer, there would be common languages no matter which automotive retailer you work for. If you're working in a hospital, the concept of a patient kind of means something, doesn't matter where you are in the world. And so this is when we take a data model and look at a whole industry sector and go, what's everybody's common language for this? Why don't we build that out of the box? And so what Microsoft did is said, we'll start with what's common across all industries, and the 2 most common, which is in the core, is called accounts and contacts. The idea that an account, of course, is a business or a legal entity, and a contact, I always used to like to say, breathes oxygen and has blood in its veins, right? It's some type of connection related to the other. So it allows, as I say, multiple apps to be developed and multiple data sets to be included. And then if we look at, this is a nice slide for Microsoft, your data can be stored in various silos across the organization. If we then take that a step forward and we share that data, we can model the relationships and therefore allow us to gather insights from a much broader interrelated data connection set. So that's our common data model. So Microsoft has produced this document, it's a PDF. You can go grab it from Microsoft Docs. And as you can see, Microsoft in the core CDS tenant released these core elements, which are basically 2 entities plus a whole bunch of activity types and a bit other meta information. CRM has a list of leads, of course, opportunities, accounts, contacts, invoices. If you want a real interesting read, my blog just scheduled a post that just went live now, which is going to create some controversy, where I said why Dynamics 365 hasn't changed. Sorry, Dynamics 365 for sales hasn't changed in 20 years. Why? I know some Microsoft people are going to get excited about that post, but I go and drill into this this entity and say, why hasn't it fundamentally changed, right? Sales is so different, but Microsoft's data model or common data model for sales is what this is. And as you can see, every app that Microsoft produces has a common data model associated with it. So if we look at what these are, I'll just put these up quickly. I don't want to waste the next speaker's time, do I, Scott? So just at a high level, you know, there's a shared data model, allows applications and data integration are already covered, allows that metadata to be handed interoperably between the relationships, and then ultimately allows us, of course, to plug in our apps, etc., or our reporting within that application. The way Microsoft models it here, once again, you can see core and then the individual applications sitting within that, ultimately handed over to other tools that allow us to create rich AI reports, allows us to ultimately now take us into, for example, the AI builder and really start to manipulate our data using machine learning. So the common data model, note, is not the common data service. This is all just about modeling relationships in the first example. And the second example is about what Microsoft considered as standard across the industry and therefore built into the platform. This allows, of course, ISVs to build at various levels of it, but underpinning the Microsoft industry standard common data model is the accelerators that Microsoft are now producing, if you like, per industry. So I've got a guy coming on my podcast shortly who's been involved in designing the common data model for the non-for-profit sector. So once again, there's standards across that industry sector that have been modeled at this level. And the idea of what Microsoft are wanting to do here is stopping everybody having to develop the same thing that applies in every industry so you can build apps faster and smarter.
Service is based on the common data model, so obviously you'll remember in a few iterations ago it used to be CDM, the common data model. It's still there. It's essentially the CDS is just kind of like the top layer of it. It's still based on the CDM and has that kind of common entity structure. This is where we get the accelerators. You've got the non-for-profit accelerator, healthcare accelerator that you can essentially just plug into the CDS, which is obviously a model of data that you can plug in relevant to those industries.
Within CDS, those are the types of entities that you're going to have. So you're going to start with that. So if you think about Dynamics 365 CE, you'll have those common entities and then be able to pull in entities from other tools that you're using. So for example, Forms Pro has the survey entities that go into CDS, but then I can take those entities and put them into a CDS app. So that I can then share and run workflows and do things against all of those entities because I've combined them into one app.
So CDS is a platform on which all the first-party Dynamics 365s sit on. Well, most of them do, and more of them will do. And they are all sitting on top of the common data service, which in turn uses the common data model.
Awesome. That was a good succinct answer there. Notice that he said that all Microsoft apps sit on the common data service. So do you know that Dynamics 365 for sales, Dynamics 365 for field service are what? They're Power Apps, right? And it changes your thinking that these Dynamics products at the end of the day are Power Apps on CDS. So let's take a look at CDS in a bit of detail. So if we consider the Power Platform, it's made up at its center of CDS. Has anyone seen this before? This diagram, this logo? This is a new logo that Microsoft is using to represent CDS. And the reason for it is that people traditionally have used, you know, the oil drum type symbol of a database, and that would give you a false impression of what CDS is. It's kind of it's the old way of looking at databases. Around CDS are these four products. So in a lot of the presentations you would have seen in the past, you would have seen Power BI, you would have seen Flow and Power Apps. But now, this is a central part of the platform or the Power Platform. So there's these four components that now make up the Power Platform. So what is CDS at the end of the day? Hopefully, this diagram will help you understand what CDS is and how different it is from the common data model. So here we have a little blue dot. Anyone want to know anyone can guess what the blue dot is? It's an endpoint. It's what we'd refer to as an endpoint. And if we look at what's in CDS, we can see our web servers, our job servers, or where the workflows, etc., are carried out, sandbox and reporting instance, and that's our compute. So notice here, it's not till we get to this point that we actually start talking about database storage like SQL, Blob, Cosmos DB, and the search functionality. So CDS is this, but then as we extend into Azure, it is so much more. We have Azure Functions, Event Hubs, Service Buses, App Services, allow us to extend that platform out. So where are Power Apps, Power BI, Flow, and AI Builder? They actually all connect through this one endpoint to light up what you build. And so sitting behind this common data service is actually all the technology that's involved to allow you to produce your Power App, your Flow, your AI, and your Power BI with Microsoft's toolset. Not only that, for every copy of that, there's another copy. So you can double this by 2 because of the way Microsoft replicates this for data integrity, data redundancy, etc. So hopefully that's helped you understand a bit more how Common Data Service is not just a database, it's so much more than what we would have considered a typical relational database. So when you're going to build an app, I want you to consider these 3 steps to take. Step 1 is, what is your data model? You should start there. The simplest method of creating a data model is grabbing a pen and a napkin at a restaurant and start modeling it out. How's one thing related to the other of this amazing idea you've had? The second step you take, or should take, is there already a common data model that I can leverage? So for example, could I use one of the Dynamics 365 apps and use that data model to build what I need to build? Right? There's no point, if you're going to butcher one of these apps to create your app or your solution, don't do it. Build directly on the Common Data Service without using one of the Microsoft Common Data models if you don't need it. Now remember, industry accelerators is if you're in the automotive industry or if you're in banking or something like that, absolutely use one of Microsoft's Common Data models. But if you are going to change your app to such an extent that you're not reliant on those, just go straight to CDS and build your app there. And I'm done. Thank you.